I work in a hospital call center. It's not great work, but it pays the bills. Though you may not think it, you get a lot of calls during the 8-hour shift you work. Usually it's just people trying to find a relative who might be in there, someone trying to schedule an appointment in surgery, maybe even someone seeking medical advice. I'm apparently not qualified to do any of those things, so the job became a lot of telling people, "One moment please while I transfer you." Then you send them off to their desired department, or not, and you get to talk to them again, except less polite this time. You get a lot of angry people too, most looking for billing, or maybe because they got charged for a hospital service they didn't receive. Those people are best sent off as quickly as possible, before they can get a good head of steam going. There are 4 to 6 of us in the department at any given time. It's mostly college kids trying to pay their bills, or older people looking for a little extra on top of their social security. All in all, I think around 10 of us work the switchboard, and you get to know your coworkers pretty well, especially when there's so few of you. We also take turns working the midnight shift, most of us working the day or the mid shift primarily, and at the end of the month, we all walk away with a nice chunk of overtime for our troubles. People being people, there's always 12 or 16 hours of overtime a month. No one minds much, the job's pretty easy, and I liked having a job where I could finish my schoolwork or play on my phone for 8 to 16 hours and still get paid. That was before the heavy breather. Not a week went by where he didn't get at least one notation in the logbook. The notations were supposed to be for strange or unusual calls. For the last few months, most of the entries have been a heavy breather. We had named the caller because their calls were all pretty much the same. You'd pick up the phone and hear the telltale heavy breathing on the other end and know what was going on. We all just figured it was some pervert, some lonely sicko trying to get his rocks off to someone on the other end. You'd hang up before he could get his satisfaction and make a note of it in the logbook. I say these things like they were regular occurrences, but in truth, I had yet to get the mystery caller. Every other operator had gotten him at least twice, some of them 3 or 4 times, but I had never managed to see what all the fuss was about. I would get my wish a couple of days later, though. 3 days of midnights? My boss just shrugged at me as she sank the push pin into the bulletin board. She posted our schedules by hand every week, despite the rest of the hospital having access to an electronic payroll system which generated the schedule for them. Martha is old school, though. Probably since she's been here since they pulled her out of the foundation when they broke ground. She's one of the best bosses I've ever had, too. She doesn't like how short-handed we are any more than we do. "Sorry, kid. Roger says he's taking the weekend off to go visit his boyfriend. He's always doing this on such short notice. I swear I'd have fired him on the spot if we weren't so short-handed. Still, all 3 nights? You're the only one with an open schedule, kid. I'll give you next weekend off if you want it. Scout's honor." Martha made the promise so freely that I took her up on it in a heartbeat. A promise from Martha was worth its weight in gold. She couldn't possibly have known that this would likely be the last weekend I'd ever sit behind that desk. Friday night went pretty normally. I arrived at 11 p.m., brewed a thermos of coffee, and got to my desk around 11:15. Jordan and Aiden were there, finishing up their calls and cleaning up their stations as they waited for midnight. We chatted a little as I logged on, discussing call volume and talking about tonight's call-in schedule. Apparently, there was a team I needed to call in at 4 a.m. for a 5 a.m. case, and they added that the heavy breather had been calling a lot today. They don't say anything, they just keep calling about once an hour, like they're looking for someone. Pam swears she heard them say a name before they hung up, but Pam likes to make stuff up for attention. I got a little excited when Jordan told me that. If they were calling more often, then maybe I'd get to talk to them. I know it's weird to hope that a crazy person will call up and breathe on the phone, but I really wanted to experience it. I felt like it would make me like everyone else, and I was a little sore that I hadn't gotten him yet. I would get my wish about an hour later. It was about 12:30 when they called. I was sitting in the call center basement, sipping coffee and checking Reddit on my phone, when I heard the computer chirp and inform me that I had a call. It was from an unlisted number, not that uncommon, so I picked it up without thinking much about it. When I picked it up, it sounded like someone was sitting too close to a fan. The blowing was annoying, but I was a professional, and I tried to power through it. "Southwest Medical Center, how may I help you?" The noise on the other end sounded different slightly. I realized all at once that it was rain coming down hard on a window somewhere. Was it raining outside? It hadn't been when I came in. There hadn't been a cloud in the sky, actually. The rain covered it slightly, but as I sat in silence, I began to hear the deep breathing on the other end. There he was. There was the weird caller. "Hello, Southwest Medical, can I help you?" The breathing persisted, overtopped by the rain that hit hard on the window of wherever they were. I reached for the book to start scribbling down the usual message when I heard something over the phone. I heard a voice. "Sorry?" I asked, taken aback a little. "It's always dark here." The pen fell out of my hand. No one had ever heard this person talk. It was always just heavy breathing for a couple of minutes before they hung up. Had they been waiting for something? I wondered for a moment if they'd talked before and maybe no one had told me. Was I the first one they'd ever talked to? "It's always dark here," they repeated, and this time I stopped thinking and started listening. "Where are you?" I asked, not sure what else to say. "The rain is so loud tonight." The voice was neither male or female and sounded low and growly, like someone getting over a cold. "Look, I'm not sure who you are, but you've called a hospital. If you need some help, I'll be happy to help you, but otherwise, I need to—" "Cherish says hi," the voice whispered. That made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I had a sister named Cherish. She was about 12, and as far as I knew, she was asleep at my parents' house. I shook off my fear and began to become a little angry. Whoever this was, they were obviously having a laugh on my account, and it really wasn't funny. "Who is this? Roger, is this you? I swear to God, I'm going to HR if this is you. This isn't even a little bit funny. You need to stop." That's when the line went dead. I held the phone against my ear for a few more seconds before putting it in the cradle and looking around nervously. I expected Roger, or maybe Jordan, to pop out of the break room with their cell phone, laughing because they'd spooked me. All the company I got, though, was the sound of the air conditioner cycling overhead. I sat for a few more minutes, drumming my fingers, trying to forget the call. The more I thought about it, the weirder it got, though. My coworkers would have called back to make fun of me if this was a prank. If it wasn't them, then some stranger on the phone had called up and said my sister's name. Coincidence or not, I needed to be sure. My mom picked up on the fourth ring, and I could hear Dad grumbling in the background. "Hello? Mom, hey, sorry, is Cherish okay? I know that's a weird question, but..." I could hear her sitting up in bed. "Are you okay? You sound upset. Just please, answer me, Mom. Is Cherish okay?" I don't know, hun. She's at sleepaway camp this week." My blood ran cold. "I need you to call down there and make sure she's okay." What's all this about?" she said groggily. I got a weird phone call a minute ago, and now I have to make sure she's okay." My phone rang, and I looked at the number. Unknown name, unknown number. It couldn't be them again. "Mom, I need to call you back. Just promise me that you'll call the camp and make sure she's okay." Mom said she would, and I hung up and picked up the incoming call. I was immediately bombarded by the sound of rain on glass and muffled heavy breathing. The caller's voice sounded watery, slurry, like they'd recently choked on some water. They sounded like someone with a sore throat or a bad case of pneumonia. Like a drowned person. "Hello? Hello? Who is this?" "Cherish needs your help." I gritted my teeth and tried not to scream into the phone. "Whoever this is, you need to stop. I'm not amused. You're not funny. I want you to..." "He's gone to get her. She thinks he's her friend, but he isn't. He wants to hurt her. You have to stop him." "Who's gone to get her?" "The woodsman. He's a bad man. He wants your sister." I didn't have the slightest idea who this person was talking about, but whatever their game was, I was starting to get freaked out. "Look, this isn't funny. If this is a joke or something, it's really gone to..." The line went dead then, and I was left with static. I spent the next hour in a fitful state. I didn't want to call Mom back and bother her with this, but what if whoever that was wasn't kidding around? Surely my sister wasn't stupid enough to just go off with someone into the woods, right? I didn't know, and that lack of knowledge made me nervous. I began to feel the walls of the basement closing in on me, and the claustrophobic feeling made me shake. When the phone rang again, I caught it on the first ring without even really looking. "Hello?" I could hear the quaver in my voice. The rain was softer now, but the voice was no less intrusive. He has her!" It all but screamed at me, and I thought I could hear someone in the background crying and screaming just under that husky rasp. "He's hurting her! Please, hurry! Where are you?" I screamed at them, leaning forward as though I could fall into the computer screen. "Where has he taken her? If this was a prank, I was buying it hook, line, and sinker." I could hear someone, a small girl it sounded like, screaming and crying as someone did God knew what to her. My cell phone roared to life. I looked down to see it was Mom and picked it up without thinking. Mom was hysterical on the other end. She and Dad were in the car, driving up to the camp. The counselors had gone to check on Cherish and found her bed empty. What's more, they found muddy boot tracks going into her cabin and then leaving out the other way. They can't seem to track them. The rain here, it's been torrential. The state police are bringing in the tracking dogs, and they're going to start as soon as they can. "She's in the woods, Mom. Someone has her," I sputtered out, still hearing the screams on the phone. Mom was silent for a few breaths. "How do you know that?" "I've got a caller on the phone who says she's alive, but it sounds like he's hurting her. They're in the woods, Mom. Tell them to search the woods." She hung up on me, and when I picked up the phone, it had gone dead again. I sat in the silence and felt utterly impotent. Should I leave and go help them look? My job wasn't really the thing holding me there. I was sure people would understand if I abandoned my post, but I was hoping that the mystery caller would give me more information. Every second counted now. If my information would help them find my sister a little quicker, then all the better. I muddled through a few late-night calls while I waited, and I'm sure the people on the other end could tell I was tense. After an hour, Mom called to let me know that they'd arrived at the camp. The rain had made it very difficult for the dogs to find a trail, but they'd started searching the woods anyway. The police were confident they could locate her, but Mom wasn't so sure. She sounded scared and tired and just plain defeated. When she hung up, I stared at the phone on my desk and willed the mystery caller to call again. They'd been so chatty before. Why had they gone silent now? I pulled up call logs on my computer then and started trying to find the number. No name, no number was all I ever got. I know in movies the police can easily decode these private numbers, but I work for a hospital and not even the emergency part of the hospital. My resources were limited to what I could do on my out-of-date computer. When the phone rang 20 minutes later, I looked at the number and almost knocked it off the desk in my haste. No name, no number. "Hello? Hello? Where are you? I need you to—" "He's killing her! He's trying to make it last, but he's killing her!" The voice whispered harshly. "Where are you? The police are looking for her, but I need to know where you are." The voice was silent for a moment, and I thought I'd lost them again. On the other end, I could hear whimpers, and the person making those noises sounded broken. Hot tears ran down my face as I listened to what could be my sister's final moments. I began to beg the voice to tell me where they were. I lay my hands against the desk and cried, letting the tears flow as the voice seemed to contemplate how to answer me. "When I played here, it was about a mile from the camp, over a creek, past the blackberry fields, and up a little hill. His house is at the top of that hill. I've been here for so long, though. I don't know if any of those things are still here. Please hurry. She doesn't have much longer." Then the line went dead. I called my mom and gave her the information. When she relayed it to the counselor, they knew exactly where she was talking about. The house belonged to the groundskeeper, and he had lived there for quite a long time. She said the police were on their way now to check it out, and she asked me to thank the person on the phone if they called back. I waited for an hour, another long and agonizing hour, and when my cell phone rang, the number made my skin crawl. Unknown name, unknown caller. Were they calling my cell phone this time? That seemed unlikely, and when I picked it up, I was greeted not by the raspy voice of the sick child, but by the stony voice of Officer Darraway from the state police. He told me they'd found Cherish and the groundskeeper in his cabin. "She ain't in a good way. The bastard used the time he had to do some pretty upsetting things. She's alive and we're sending her on the next flight to the nearest hospital. That's the one you work at, I believe." I thanked him and told him to tell my parents that I'd be waiting for her when she got here. "Your mama tells me you've been in contact with another child and they gave you directions to find your sister." "Yes, she just called me out of the blue. I don't even know how she got my number." He was silent for a moment. You'll forgive me for saying so, but that seems highly unlikely." "How do you mean?" I said, startled. "The groundskeeper didn't have a phone in his cabin. His cell phone was on his person when we recovered him, and there's no other child in that cabin." That's impossible. They said they'd been there for a very long time. They've been calling for weeks." "Look, I appreciate you helping us find your sister, but this whole story seems very far-fetched. That being said, I don't think we'd have found your sister without your help. I want to take a statement from you when I get there, but just know we don't consider you in any way connected to this, despite the oddness of your claim." I thanked him, and he thanked me before hanging up. I was getting ready to call Marta, the 6 a.m. person, so she could come in a little early to relieve me, when a familiar caller popped up on my screen. No name, no number. I picked it up as I prepared to thank the caller for their help. I had just started thanking them when I heard the heavy breathing on the other end, and stopped. The sound was completely different. The caller had a husky tone to his breath, and you could clearly hear their breathing jagged up and down as they went about whatever they were doing. This was no child's breathing. This was an adult, and I hung up the call before I could think too much about it. I sat there in a daze as I pulled the call log towards me. I logged the heavy breather, but thought for a moment about recording the other caller too. They had saved my sister's life, whoever they had been, and I decided not to add them to the log. I called Marta and told her what had happened. She agreed to come in for me and said she'd see me soon before hanging up. I'm sitting with my sister in the ICU as I write this, but I can't help but wonder who that mysterious caller was. How did they call me? How did they know where to find me? My sister is heavily sedated right now, but I'm a little afraid of what she might tell me when she comes to. Does she know the girl who called me? Did she tell her how to contact me? I'm afraid to go back to work now. I'm afraid of who else might call me when I again man that desk. What other lost souls might be just a phone call away? When I was in college, I worked for a local hospital, one of the largest in North Georgia outside of Atlanta. I won't name drop because they probably don't want to be mentioned, but this hospital was huge. I'd worked clerical jobs in a few other hospitals, but you could have easily fit 3 of my previous facilities in this place. That being said, it was a mismatched monstrosity of old and new. The new medical promenade might have been a modern architectural marvel, but areas like the ER and the admin hallway still looked much as they had in the 1970s. It's a place at war with itself, constantly changing, but also constantly staying the same. That's probably why there are so many ghost stories connected to this place. Working at the ER desk, I came in for a lot of rumors, especially since I worked the night shift. Security has an office in the ER, since it's where the biggest train wrecks usually happen. That means that Carl, the night watchman, would usually wander over to hang out and watch YouTube videos when I'm not checking people in. David, the late night maintenance guy, and Mark, the 11 to 7 switchboard operator, were also pretty likely to come hang out if the night was slow or they were on break. Between the 3 of them, I've heard all the good stories from after hours. Some of them were kind of funny, like the nurses Carl walked in on screwing during a security check, or the handsome ER surgeon, Dr. Logan, who cried to Mark for 3 hours while he was stuck in the elevator that wouldn't work. These stories were fun, but they inevitably led to stories about the hospital's haunted areas and the weird occurrences they sometimes witness. Some of them were clearly bullshit, like David telling me that his ladder had disappeared from the 4th floor stairwell and appeared on the roof. But some of them were too weird to be pure fabrication. Certain areas of the hospital were definitely more active than others. Places like the South Promenade, where a girl had jumped to her death from the 4th floor railing. David claimed to this day that he watched a shadowy figure drop to the tiles a few times, and the look on his face makes me believe that he probably wasn't lying. Then there's the matter of Mark's phantom phone calls every night. Mark claims that he gets at least 4 phone calls from the courtesy phone on the 3rd floor, between midnight and 4 a.m. The caller never says anything, but Mark was sure he could hear a little whisper under all the static. One night he had recorded the noises on his cell phone and let a friend listen to them who's into paranormal stuff. When his friend had processed it through a computer program, the caller had said things like Jackie and love and baby. But the rest had been nothing but gibberish. It happened at the same time in the wee hours every morning, and Mark had even sent Carl up to the phone on a few occasions to check for people playing jokes on him. Carl had reported that the phone wasn't even plugged in, yet the phone calls still came. Then, of course, there was Shaky Leg Mary. Many members of the hospital staff had seen the entity known as Shaky Leg Mary. She had been seen in the ambulance bay, in the ER, in the pass-through hallways where she was wheeled into surgery, but more often, she was seen wandering the OR hallways after hours. She had been a homeless woman that had been run over in front of Mary of Mercy one night, before I was even hired. Her skull had been crushed, her lungs mostly collapsed, and her left leg had been a tangled mess of bones and flesh. They had rushed her to the ER as quickly as they could, but she had died on the table as they tried to operate on her. She had made frequent appearances after that, though. So when Carl came staggering up an hour ago, looking starey and pale, I knew he had seen something. I figured he'd had another situation with a combative patient, but it turned out to be a little worse than that. I just saw her," he whispered, like he was afraid to say it out loud. I looked up from my YouTube video and clicked pause after I'd had a look at him. "Saw who?" I asked. "Mary. Shaky Leg Mary," he said. "I saw her in the surgical hallway." I told him to tell me the story, and he shakingly obliged. Carl had been doing his rounds as he usually did when he saw her. He had come through the surgical center, checking doors and making sure everything was secured. It was 3 a.m., and he was making his way briskly about his appointed rounds so he could stop by the cafeteria and get a cup of coffee before he headed upstairs to continue. All he had to do was cut through the surgical OR hallway, check the operating room doors, and he'd come out next to the cafeteria. He had opened the door, and that's when he'd seen her. She'd been standing in the hallway, her back to Carl, and he had pulled out his flashlight to shine it at her. He was just about to yell at her, tell her that this was a restricted area, and that's when he had finally noticed her leg. It was twisted up like a bent signpost, and he watched as it flexed weirdly beneath her. Her hair was dark and oozed with something pink and viscous. Carl swore he could hear her breathing raggedly, her air hitching in oddly as her deflated lungs tried to pump it, and the bulb popped when he dropped his flashlight. The sound made her turn, and her squashed face looked like a ruined jack-o'-lantern as the bulbous eyes stared blindly in his direction. "She was as far from me as that water fountain," he said, pointing to a fountain that was about 30 feet away. "But that leg didn't stop her from coming after me." Carl said she hunkered, going on all fours like a dog, and charged him grotesquely. Carl backpedaled, trying to run, but had tripped over his feet and fallen onto his rump at the least opportune time. She was gasping and closing in on him, jaws opening weirdly and a mouth that was mostly broken, when Carl thought to close the door between the two of them. He kicked out shakily and slammed the heavy door shut just as she was about to jump at him. She hit it like a cannonball and then screamed like an angry wildcat. As he sprawled there, panting, in the lighted hallway, he heard her slamming into the door 6 or 7 times before he found his feet and ran to somewhere where he knew there would be people. That's what had brought him to me. Carl later got David to agree to go with him to make sure it wasn't just some homeless person who had wandered in and was trashing the place. The two of them turned on all the lights and explored every OR room and the storage closets, but they didn't find anything but surgical equipment and cobwebs. She had disappeared as quickly as she had arrived, but they did bring me to that door to show me that she had left something behind before I left for the night. David showed me a heavy indent on the OR side of the door that had left a deep mark in the metal there. "The door's a little bent too," he added. "I'm sure I can fix the track on it before the week is out," though he was emphatic about the fact that he wouldn't fix it after dark. Carl never went into the OR hallway again after hours, and the legend of Shaky Leg Mary continued to grow. I met someone new at the hospital tonight. Someone with a very interesting story. Mark came over to watch YouTube videos on his break as I sat behind the reception desk, and he had someone new with him, wearing brown scrubs signaling he was a custodian. Mark said his name was Gerald, and they had struck up a friendship as he cleaned the switchboard office. The two had started talking about spooky stuff. Mark had told him about the calls from the third floor, the phantom phone calls that happened in the wee hours, and Gerald had told him about the strange occurrences he had heard about on the third floor as well. It's not really that scary, but it's pretty weird. I told him I'd love to hear it, and he began. It all started when Maria disappeared. The meeting was just as it was every day. The head custodian giving out assignments, talking about budgets, assigning special teams, before he started down a very different track. He told us the third floor would be cleaned in pairs now, and that no one would be cleaning alone after 8 p.m. There were quite a few raised eyebrows at this. It would take longer to clean if they had to do it in pairs, but the next announcement really got them staring. Management has asked us to remind you that if you hear anyone calling your name from a room you know to be empty, do not respond. Leave the area and inform a member of the custodial team. You will not be disciplined. Management wants to ensure that no one else goes missing on shift. We broke then, going to clean our assigned areas. They were, of course, talking about Maria. Maria had been a custodian at the hospital for several years. She had been working her way through cosmetology school, living with her mother and helping with the bills. Anyone who had worked with Maria knew that she was passionate about her family and her education. She was friendly, but she made it very clear that she didn't have time for boys or needless waste. She worked, she went home, she went to school, and then she repeated the process the next day. She had disappeared one night during her shift, and it was harder to write off as just another young person disappearing with their boyfriend. Staff had been questioned, work schedules had been looked over, cameras had been watched, and Maria remained unfound. The footage showed that Maria had come to work, clocked in at the scanner box, and gone off to the shift meeting. She had taken her cart up to the third floor and began to clean. She cleaned 3 North, the short stay wing, and moved on to 3 South, the longer residency wing. Many of these rooms were empty. COVID had made long-term stay a matter of quarantine, and those people were housed downstairs in the ER overflow. She had gone to lunch at 7:30 and then returned to her duties. At 9, a camera near the nurse's station had seen her turn suddenly and look into room 405. She had stood as though hearing something inside. The mop she had been putting away looked like it might fall out of her hands, and she let it fall from the cart as she took a step towards the room she'd been staring at. She stepped into the room like a sleepwalker and never stepped back out again. That had been a week ago. The announcement about the voices had come after they'd interviewed a few of her friends. They said that she had been nervous lately. She claimed that she hadn't been sleeping well. She told them that she had dreamed about this place. In the dream, she was cleaning the hallways, and from the doors, she could hear voices calling her name. They told her to come investigate, to come look, to come and see, and just as she would catch sight of the speaker, she would come awake, crying. She couldn't remember what had been in those rooms, but it always filled her with a sense of dread. When she started hearing the voices at work, too, she had asked people to come with her. They said she was afraid to be alone, especially on the third floor, where the voices seemed to follow her. She had stopped sleeping at all, her eyes bearing dark circles, and the last day they had seen her at work, she confided that her studies had suffered as well. She was slowly driving herself crazy with these delusions, one of the other housekeepers had said. I think if it had gone on much longer, she would have probably crashed her car on the way to work one morning. Now Maria had gone, and more than one custodian had refused to clean the third floor, something that was about to become a big problem for me. I was cleaning the first floor bathrooms when Roger approached me. Gerald, I need you to move for a while. I looked up from my mop bucket. Yeah? Who quit? Jan. After I told her she'd have to clean the third floor, I need to move you up there to work with Daryl. Christ, you sure that's why she quit? I know, but you know how hard it is to fire anyone around here. Look, I just need you to clean up there for a couple of days, a week tops. I'll even give you a couple of days off, with pay, once we replace Jan. What do you say? I thought it over. 4-day weekend, 2 of them with pay, and all I had to do was clean with Daryl for a few nights. Yeah, I suppose that would be okay. I had already figured that I would be doing most of the cleaning myself, but that wasn't too bad either. Cleaning was monotonous, but it wasn't terribly hard. Half the rooms I'd have to clean were empty anyway, so it would just be a little light upkeep. What was the worst that could happen, right? I took my cart and headed upstairs. When the elevator doors opened, I could already see a cart waiting in what had been the patient's waiting area, and was now just a corridor with benches in it. I could see soda cans on it, 3 or 4 empties, and about 3 others that were waiting to be sacrificed, and knew just whose it was. Daryl's cart was much like Daryl, messy and unconcerned with it. Daryl had about as much business being a custodian as I had being a pigeon, but Roger had been right. They were desperate for help, and Daryl came to work, even if he didn't do anything. I walked over to 3 North and introduced myself, asking what still needed to be cleaned. The charge nurse sniffed. Everything to my knowledge. I haven't seen Daryl at all. Not that I'm surprised. I sighed. I had hoped that Jan would have at least cleaned 3 North before quitting, but I suppose that was too much to hope for. I set to work with my mop and my cleaners and started cleaning up behind patients and staff. It took forever. Some of the toilets in the patients' rooms looked like they hadn't been cleaned in years, and when I finally rolled my cart off the wing, it was after 9. I was thinking longingly about my dinner, but decided to finish 3 South so I could eat and start on 3 East when I got done. As expected, 3 South was a ghost town. The nurse's station was empty, the monitors black, and the whole wing was quiet. I wondered which one of these rooms I'd find Daryl asleep in, and shook my head as I set about dusting the nurse's station. The dust wasn't too thick. It was obvious that the station had either been dusted recently, or the wing had been cleared out recently. The break room was also pretty clean. I only had to clean a few moldy food items out of the fridge and change some garbage. The bathrooms needed cleaning. Clearly Daryl didn't do bathrooms. And once the station was clean, it was time to head to the rooms. As I started cleaning, I kept my ears peeled for sounds. Now, I didn't believe in voices from rooms. Ghosts and spooks were totally something I didn't put a lot of stock in. But I did believe in serial killers, or people who kidnap people to sell them into the human trafficking market. Maria had been a very pretty girl, young and well-built, and the thought that someone had somehow taken her from the hospital wasn't terribly far-fetched. If that was the case, and this was a place they usually used to take their prey, I really didn't want to get grabbed or stabbed next. As I cleaned, though, I did start to think I heard something. At first, I wrote it off as the air conditioner, the ancient old thing making noises and trying to rattle the dust motes free of its guts. The more I cleaned, however, the more the air started to sound like words. I ignored it, thinking it was just Daryl playing tricks, if it wasn't my own mind playing tricks on me. I kept cleaning, stepping into the rooms with the open doors, and dusting the beds and the nightstands. I mopped them, checked the bathrooms, and kept the mop at hand in case I had to defend myself. I felt a little sorry for anyone who tried to jump out and scare me, because they were certainly going to get a mop handle upside the head. I was cleaning one of those rooms when I looked up into the big window behind me and stopped in my tracks. The door to the room behind me was open, the room looking much the same as the one I was cleaning, and someone was standing in the doorway, someone I would have known anywhere. My mother looked exactly the same as I remembered her. Her dark hair, usually up in a bun on her head, fell around her in a long wave of ebony. She was wearing a light white dress, her bare feet poking out from beneath it. She was standing in the doorway, arms spread wide, inviting me to come to her. Her face was serene, restful, exactly the way I remembered her the last time I'd seen her. It was exactly the way she had looked as her casket lid shut and we put her in the ground. I turned around, but she was gone. I put the mop in the bucket and stuck my head out of the room. I called out, seeing if anyone was near. I'd been cleaning for nearly an hour and still hadn't seen Daryl. I wasn't afraid to clean by myself. I wasn't superstitious, didn't believe in spirits, but not seeing anyone was beginning to become nerve-wracking. When no one called out or challenged me, I got back to work. I closed the door to the room I had just been in, but as I wheeled my cart away, I heard a soft voice from the room across from this one. It was low and inviting, and I couldn't help but think of my mom again. The voice was calling to me, begging me to come to her, and I stopped again to look through the door to that room. She was gone, no one inside the room but the shadowy furniture, but it almost seemed like I could feel someone watching me from inside. She was there, and she wanted me to come to her. As I stood dithering in the hall, a multitude of voices called from the doors that stood open farther up. I recognized all of them. They were the voices of lost loved ones, old friends, and others who had passed on. I heard my great-uncle, my first girlfriend, my third-grade English teacher, and so many more. I heard them calling to me, trying to entice me into their room, to entice me from this world, and I felt my feet pulled towards them as they called. I'd have walked willingly into those rooms, but at that moment, an alarm went off, and I was jarred back to reality. Code blue, room 302. Code blue, room 302. I shook myself. Somewhere on 3 North, there would be people with crash carts in full sprint. Somewhere on 3 North, nurses would be pulling charts and calling doctors. Family members might be yelling or crying, praying to God for their loved ones to come out of this crisis. On 3 South, however, there was only me and the multitude of voices. With the last of my resolve, I ran. I cocked an eyebrow at Gerald. What happened after that? I came to talk to Mark about it. I know he's had some weird experiences in this place, and I was hoping he might have some insight. He brought me down here to talk to you. I shrugged. I can talk to Carl. Maybe he'll go up to the 3rd floor with you when you need to clean. Seeing Carl wander by about that time, I called out to him, and he came somberly over to us. I made my request, and Carl agreed, but said he couldn't tonight. 3rd floor is closed for the moment anyway. We're missing a custodian, and a few of us are being sent to search 3 South. After the girl disappeared last week, this will probably get the wing closed off. As it happens, the wing did close. It was temporarily closed, of course. They'll have patients in there again if the need arises. God help us if one of them goes missing. Staff is one thing, but if their precious patients go missing, they might have to actually do something about it. Gerald went back to his usual cleaning route. We still talk sometimes. He's a good guy, and I don't mind having a cup of coffee with him. We guys who have been privy to the strange happenings of the hospital have to stick together, after all. I slammed the basket of files down on the desk. Couldn't help feeling a spasm of rage stab through me. Sitting on the small desk in the old record storage was nearly 2 hours of work that would now need to be refiled. The idiot doctor who had ordered them, one in a long line of idiot doctors who worked at this hospital, had sent out an email about 10 minutes ago saying he no longer needed them. No apology, no explanation, just a dismissal of need and a negation of all my work. Didn't matter that I'd spent 2 hours sneezing in the dusty archives looking for them, just like it didn't matter that I'd now have to put them away again. Now that he no longer needed them, they were essentially dead to him. I left them on the desk next to the basket labeled "To be filed" and walked towards the top of the stairs. The doctor would eventually need them again. The second I refilled them, I had no doubt, so I'd let them sit there for a couple of days to be sure. Since I was one of 3 people who had keys to this room, I was pretty secure in the notion that they weren't going anywhere. I stepped to the head of the stairs and flipped the lights off. The darkness in the file room gathered behind me, and I prepared to descend. I'd been working at the hospital for about 4 years, and patient records was by far my favorite post. I'd spent my first year in food service, bussing trays and pushing piles of dishes into the sanitizer, before taking a custodial position that I immediately hated the day after I started. I had only thought that food service employees got treated like crap, but custodians got treated like worse than crap. When a patient records position became available 6 months later, I jumped at the chance and never looked back. When I started, there were 3 people per shift, plenty of work to go around, and a supervisor who was less hands-on and more work from home. My days were spent pulling files for doctors, integrating old files back into the current format, and maintaining records as best I could. 90% of the job, though, was finding files for the army of doctors who worked at the hospital. This was the part of the job I liked the best. I know that sounds weird, but it's the truth. I lived for the thrill of the hunt. I loved finding hard-to-find files, and finding missing patient records became my passion. I'd sort through files for hours as I tried to find that one elusive patient file, or that one bit of misplaced paperwork, and the thrill of discovering it made me feel great. I felt like Indiana Jones or Lara Croft as I searched for the unfindable treasure and unearthed it from obscurity. In my first 6 months, I became the go-to guy for finding hard-to-find files, and I took a small amount of pride in that honor. About 6 months into the job, however, the department suffered a significant overhaul. It turned out the supervisor had been doing less work from home as we thought and more embezzling company funds from home. So they fired him and they put a much more hands-on boss in his place. His first order of business was to cut the departments down to himself, his secretary, and 3 file clerks. It was never a question on whether or not I'd be asked to take one of those positions. Since coming to the department, I'd received 2 kudos and gone far beyond what was required of my job. When the request for the second shift file clerk hit my desk, I wasn't surprised. The second shift was the one that took on the most crap, had the largest workload, and the worst hours. The job would be harder than any of the other file clerk positions, but the work was rewarding in its own way. The small raise I received paid my bills with a nice little chunk left over every month for myself. The job had many low points, but my least favorite part among them was going into the old record storage. Old record storage was a little room up an old flight of concrete stairs in what maintenance called the South Mez. It's full of metal shelves that might as well be made out of razor blades that are stacked with boxes that stretch all the way back to the 1960s. Once or twice a year, they purge some of the oldest ones, but they keep putting new files in its place, so the load up there never really goes down. I don't hate the space. It's cozy, it smells like old paper, and that's comforting to me. It's also where I find the majority of my hidden treasures, so I never really mind going up there. No, the problem is always going back. A continuously running set of bulbs light the stairs themselves, but the light switch for the records room is at the top of the stairs. When you get to the top, you had to turn on the lights. When you leave, you have to turn the lights off and walk down the stairs as the dark presses in behind you. Now, I'm no coward. Even as a kid, I was never afraid of the dark. But there's something unsettling about having the darkness so close behind you. You can't see what's back there, and your mind plays little tricks on you. Is there something lurking in the dark waiting to pounce on you? Someone waiting for you to get midway down so they can push you? It doesn't help that the concrete stairs are treacherous, and one false step would send you bumping and scraping all the way down to the bottom. I couldn't tell you when I started counting the stairs as I went down them. It's become sort of a game I'd play with myself over time. Get down all 23 stairs before the monster kills you, and you win your life. What fun! So I started down the stairs, the pervasive darkness seeming to push at my back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Stopped. Thought I heard a noise at the top of the landing, but shook it off. The old stairs made a lot of weird noises, and the paranoia I was feeling was due to the darkness at the top. I considered looking back, but some little voice in my head said it was best not to. Looking back was not allowed when you played the stair game. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. It almost seemed like I heard a low rumble behind me, but I shrugged it off as the air handler's tuning up. 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. I reached the bottom, opened the fire door, and walked out into the hallway that led back to my cubicle. Once again, I had won the game and was allowed to go back to work. I allowed myself a mental pat on the back and went back to my walled-off piece of personal space. The rest of the day went by in the same monotonous repetition, and when 11:30 finally got there, and Lisa came in to relieve me, I grabbed my bag and went home. It was the first night I dreamed about the stairs. There weren't 23 steps in my dream, though. Each step I took led to another, which led to another, which led to another step in an endless staircase. As I climbed the endless stairs, I could see something moving in the darkness at the top, and its form was hidden by the shadows that made it all the stranger by its unknowable self. It seemed feline, a long, black, sleek body with an oddly small head that was sure to house rows of sharp teeth. I climbed and climbed all night long, never seeming to pass the midpoint, but before I could reach the top, my alarm went off. I was tired that morning, but I shrugged it off and had an extra large cup of coffee when I got to work. I was greeted by an email when I sat down for my afternoon, and I was unsurprised by its contents. Some of the files I had pulled yesterday were indeed needed, and the doctor in question had asked for the first 8 of them to be brought down to his office by 6 o'clock this afternoon, or suffer ye the wrath of a man who wears pajama clothes to work and has a god complex. I sighed. Never seemed to change. I grabbed my black canvas bag from beside the desk, the one I used to transport confidential files, and took my key to the door that led to the old record storage. I felt a sense of déjà vu as I mounted the steps, but thankfully they did not morph into an endless staircase as I had feared they would. I counted as I climbed, but I found my eyes wandering up to the inky blackness at the top of the staircase, more than they usually did. At stair 15, I stopped and squinted into the darkness. What was that? I wondered. Sure, there was something moving up there in that soupy blackness. Had it looked feline? No, I told myself as I tried to shake off the terror that threatened to bubble up. I was seeing things due to an overactive imagination and a bad night's sleep. So I finished the climb, taking them 2 at a time now, and flipped the lights on with a quick, decisive stroke. Nothing. There was nothing at the top of the stairs, except sharp metal shelves and papers that were older than I was. I sorted through the files on the desk and quickly found the 8 files that the doctor had wanted. I put the rest in the to-be-filed basket and put those that I had pulled out in my canvas bag. That done, I moved to the head of the stairs and flipped the lights off as I prepared to descend the staircase. My brain sent an immediate message to run down the stairs and get this over with, but I wasn't about to slip and break a leg just because my imagination was working overtime. So with a calm and easy gait, I descended the stairs and counted as I always had. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What was that noise? That sounded an awful lot like claws on concrete. Maybe just a quick peek back to see. No. This was silly. Safely get down the stairs so we can deliver these files. 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, that was definitely something. Something was walking on the landing up there. I hope it lets me get to the bottom before it jumps on me and tears my head off, because stop being stupid and just walk down the stairs. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. I could almost hear it preparing to leap on me, and my mind quivered in silent fear. My rational brain tried to rein it in, but it was just so dark. 18, 20, 22, 23. I took the last few steps 2 at a time, and as my feet hit the landing, I opened the door to go out into the hallway. Once I was in the lighted corridor, I felt pretty silly about my dangerous descent. I turned to close the fire door behind me when it slammed shut hard enough to ruffle my hair. I stood looking at it in disbelief. That had been weird. I shrugged it off, though. It's an odd air current, and turned to leave. When I went to take another step, though, I came up short. That's when I realized the slamming door had trapped my messenger bag in the corridor beyond, and I'd need to free it from the closed door if I wanted to go back to work. I hesitated for a minute, remembering the door slamming as though someone had pushed it, but I shook it off and threw the door open a little harder than I meant to. It opened on an empty hallway, and my bag swung free as it thunked against my leg. I shook my head, becoming disgusted with myself in this newfound cowardice, and lifted the bag to make sure none of the files had spilled out. When I brought it into the light, however, I saw that something had slashed the side of it. The bag had a 3-foot gash in the canvas that looked like a knife had cut the crap out of it. More surprising was the state of the files inside. Of the 8, 4 were slashed cleanly through, and a 5th was nearly 2/3 cut in half. I had thought the bag might have gotten caught on something, but the files... These were no small files by any means, and it looked as though someone had taken the world's sharpest X-Acto knife and cut 5 of them vertically. If I wasn't seeing it for myself, I would have said it was impossible. I knew that neither my supervisor nor the doctor would like it very much. On that account, I had been right. Neither of them believed my story about pulling them from the bag that way, despite having the bag they were in as proof, and I was accused of vandalizing patient records. A quick check of both my desk and the mez proved that I had no way of vandalizing them, and all they could really find to do was reprimand me for not reporting damaged files. I accepted that. I accepted the scolding that came with it. Spent the rest of the day trying to put the files into a digital format so the doctor could read them and make his patient assessment. My mind wasn't in it, though, and I kept jumping back to the stairs. Couldn't figure out how the bag had been slashed like that. By the end of the day, I only had 4 of them done. I asked Lisa to work on the last if she found some time tonight. She said that shouldn't be a problem. I decided that some real sleep was what I really needed tonight, and so after a hefty dose of rum and coke, I fell into bed and was asleep almost at once. The dream was waiting for me, though. I climbed those stairs, 23 or 48 or 5,000, depending on something or nothing, and all the while I would see that thing stalking at the edge of the darkness. Its long, sleek body was a bunch of tense muscles as it moved back and forth like a tiger in a cage. Tonight, though, I would get to the top of the stairs, turn the lights on. Nothing would be there. I would see it within touching distance once I crested the stairs, but then I would turn the lights on, and it would be gone. I'd then turn the lights off again and walk down the stairs as it stalked and hunched behind me, only to start over again when I got to the bottom. I went up, turned on the lights, turned it off, came back down, only to do it again. All the while it paced and flitted in the shadowy soup of that upper stairs. Just when I thought it would go on forever, I got to the top, flipped the lights on, and it sprang at me like a jack-in-the-box and knocked both of us down the stairs. I woke up screaming just before I hit the ground. My body was a wreck. My muscles were tired and aching, like I'd been going up and down stairs all night, and I could barely keep my eyes open when I got to work that afternoon. I plowed through the rest of my transcription work, a full cup of coffee always at hand, but I could feel my eyes trying to close. I snatched a few cat naps throughout the day, but every time I'd close my eyes, I'd see that thing jumping at me and sit up with a start. My boss never caught me napping, thank God, and no one wanted anything from the mez that day. I dragged myself home at 11:30 and collapsed right back into the dream. Up and down, up and down, up and down the stairs. The whole time that thing was pacing and waiting in the inky blackness above. I cried in my sleep, my body wanting to drop, and when I woke up, I could feel my pillow damp underneath me, my body aching at the thought of the day ahead. When I got to work that day, I saw a sticky note on my monitor that filled me with dread. In my boss's neat handwriting, I read that the doctor had requested more records from old record storage. The doctor had written underneath it in his stupid little squiggly writing, "And be sure not to ruin them this time, please." I could have happily marched into his office and fed him that sticky note, but I was too tired to argue. With a heavy heart, I grabbed my damaged bag and headed for the stairs. As I stood outside the fire door, trying to press my shaky key into the lock, I thought that maybe this would be for the best. Maybe this was just what I needed to get past these dreams. If I could stand up to my fears and show my conscious mind that there was nothing to be afraid of, then maybe I could get some sleep tonight and finally stop feeling like a zombie. The door opened easily, and as I looked up the stairs, I felt that rush of deja vu. It looked massive to me, a climb on par with Everest. But I squared my shoulders and prepared to make that climb. 1, 2, 3. I tried not to look at the darkness ahead, but my eyes seemed incapable of looking anywhere else. 4, 5, 6, 7. Was something moving in that darkness? 8, 9, 10. No, you're imagining things. That darkness is as benign as it always has been. 11, 12, 13, 14. Something was moving in there. I could see it. I could see it pacing and stalking as it prepared to 15, 16, 17 leap on me and devour me on these steep, death-trap stairs while I climbed them to do nothing more important than dig through the past. 18, 19. I stopped for a moment, squinting into the darkness. Did I really see something? I was sure I did, but it was hard to tell by the light of those old fluorescents that hung humming above me. I started climbing again, and while I wasn't sure I couldn't see anything, I couldn't be sure there wasn't something up there either. 20, 21, 22, 23. I lifted my hand out shakily, flipped the switch, expecting to be pounced on any minute, but as the shapeless mass... Click. Nothing. Just old records and metal shelves. Same as always. I let out a thankful sigh and felt silly now that I stood in the light of the overheads and looked around like a furtive mouse. Of course there was nothing up here. Where would it hide? The room was long, but it was narrow and lacking in places to remain unseen. I scolded myself as I unpacked boxes and slowly unearthed the files the doctor needed. After an hour, I had them all secured within my satchel and ready for transport back to the land below. I moved to the top of the stairs and prepared to descend. Then I stood there, frozen for a few seconds, my hands hovering over the switch. I considered just leaving the lights on. Surely someone would see it and turn it off the next time they were up there. If Lisa found it on, she probably wouldn't even tattle on me. I knew, however, that if Dave from first shift came up here and found the lights on, he would definitely say something to my boss. Dave wanted my shift bad. He hated early mornings, and he'd see this as a perfectly good reason to tattle on me and take my shift. No, I thought, my hands on the light switch. I needed to do this. I needed to rediscover my courage, and more importantly, I needed to prove to myself that I could still do this. As always, I counted, but it was less of a game and more of a talisman at this point. Say the incantation and keep the darkness at bay. 1, 2, 3, 4. There was a loud whump as something pushed a box off the shelf. No, not pushed. I just hadn't put it back right. Nothing could be up there. Nothing could hide up there when the light was on. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, that sound was not my imagination. I heard claws settling on the landing above me, a space I had occupied not even 30 seconds ago. I could see it there in my mind as it crouched and made ready to spring. Even as I thought it, my mind railed against such an idea. You're silly. It's just an echo of your shoes scuffing on the stairs. There is no monster at the top of this stair. 10, waiting to leap on me from its high perch, and 11, rend me into pieces where I stand. There's no beast in the darkness whose sole 12 purpose is to kill me and continue my nightmare existence of the last few days. 13, but there is, God help me, a creature up there. I can feel his eyes as they bore into me. I can hear his panting breath as he waits for me, just out of reach. I can almost hear his malice and his madness and his hunger and his delight and the feelings too primal and alien to be felt as anything but insects on my flesh. 14. Pop! I nearly jumped as a soft snapping sound whispered like a cannon shot above my head. I felt my foot become shaky, but I settled my feet again and looked up to the hanging cage over my head. I laughed a little as I realized it was just the sound of a light going out above me. I thought to myself that it was about time one of these things buzzed out. The light they cast was yellow, and sometimes I like to think the bulbs they used were probably older than I was. God help anyone who was on these stairs when... My blood ran cold for a moment. When they finally burst and left some poor fool in the dark. That's when I broke the rules of the game. For the first time in 3 years, I looked behind me, and my breath hung in my throat. There it was, crouched on the landing at the top of the stairs. It was far worse than I had even imagined. It had the sleek, feline body and long claws that I had imagined, but that was where its similarities to a cat ended. Instead of fur, it was covered in glistening black chitin, and as it swished its hips in preparation to leap, its plates rubbed together without making a single sound. It didn't seem to have eyes on its featureless face, but it did have a gaping maw full of sharp teeth that seemed constantly made damp by a blotchy red tongue. It saw me seeing it somehow, and it smiled at me with those steak knife-sized teeth as it flicked its head at the light cage above me. The other bulb popped with a little musical tinkle, and I was left in total darkness. 15, 17, 19, I started running down the stairs, 2 at a time, and the flying leaps were probably all that saved me. It let me get 3 long steps down before it hit me in the back with the full weight of its body, and I fell the last 4 steps. Even though it was only a few steps, I fell hard, and the concrete stairs skinned me up good. I pulled my body into a ball as I fell, and while my head and organs were mostly spared, my arms and legs were gouged and ripped by the semi-stone of that unyielding staircase. I landed on my side at the bottom stoop, and again, this may have saved my life. Before I could even think to sit up, the creature screamed and leaped from the middle of the staircase. It was either too eager for the kill or overestimated its jump, because I heard it plow through the drywall and slam into the pipes and steel beams beyond. I got to my feet and felt for the fire door. I found the handle somehow, and when I reached to open it, the creature screamed and flailed out with its long claws. It caught me in the back and arms with a few frantic swipes, and just as I came into the light, I felt myself jerked backwards towards the den of darkness. I screamed in frustration and grabbed the door frame for more leverage as I tried to pull myself free. When the bag strap pressed hard into my shoulder, I realized, almost too late, that it was using the bag to pull me in. I pressed the release on the trendy seatbelt-style buckle, and as the strap parted, I turned to sneer into the eyeless face as I slammed the door and collapsed into the carpeted hallway. It rammed at the door, and I pulled myself up and braced my weight against it. The door, made of concrete and reinforced steel, bent a little as the creature slammed into it, and it was all I could do to hold my pitiful body against it. I don't remember passing out, but I guess I must have, because that's where my boss found me a few minutes later. He called security and got me down to the ER so they could take a look at my injuries. The hospital offered to pay me for all my care, and it was a good thing they did, because I would have likely sued them if they'd tried to send me a bill. In all, I had 3 large cuts on my back that needed stitches, 5 smaller ones that needed to be clean and bound, a wrist that was nearly broken and would be sore for several weeks, and too many bumps and scrapes to count. One of the techs said he remembered a motorcycle rider who had fallen off his bike on the freeway, and the description certainly fit how I felt, run over and next to dead. I told security about what had happened on the stairwell, and they went to investigate. I doubt any of them believed a monster had lived in the stairwell of the old record storage, but when an employee gets hurt that badly on the job, there is paperwork that still needs to be filed with something. They searched and searched, going up into the ceiling tiles and inspecting the hole in the wall, but found nothing other than my bag that had been torn to shreds and thrown through the hole in the wall. They were at a complete loss of how the door had been so badly damaged, and one of the security guys said that if I had done this to the door or the wall, I'd probably be in a lot worse shape than I was now. The write-up paperwork they so generously delivered to me says that I fell down the stairs after the lights went out and hit my head, which explained why I thought something attacked me, and why I destroyed my bag, the patient records inside, the wall, and the fire door before throwing the bag and blundering out into the hallway. Even though I had no head injury, this description was passed on and went into my file as an accident. My supervisor got an accommodation for his efforts to aid an injured employee, smarmy prick, and I spent a few days recovering in a room upstairs before any of this was brought to my attention. When it was, I felt mad enough to spit. It was absolute crap, every word of it, but HR told me I could either sign it and avoid dismissal, or refuse and be fired for destroying patient records and fabricating an event to avoid work. They alluded to the fact that this would follow me to every job I applied for from now on. With a mark like that and a record of destroying files, I'd be hard-pressed to get another office job. In the end, I signed it and then promptly resigned. They agreed that was best, and when I left the hospital 2 days later, they sent my personal effects with me. That was 6 months ago. Now I work in an office building where I maintain client records, digital only in this place, and I'm pleased to say that I haven't had to climb a set of stairs since my accident. I wish that was where my story ends, but I'm afraid it doesn't. You see, I ran into an old coworker a few weeks ago while I was out at a bar with some friends. He told me David stepped up to become the new second shift file clerk after I left. 3 months after that, they found him dead in the old record stairwell. I felt bad because unfortunately it was Lisa who found him. Well, most of him. They found his hands and his head, along with some torn up records and a bunch of broken glass from the overhead cage. Not a drop of blood, though, not on the stairs or anywhere. It scared a lot of people. After that, the administration had decided the stairs were too hazardous, and all the old files were put in digital format. He said the mezz had become storage for old custodial equipment, but none of the custodians would go up there if they could help it. More than one had felt something staring at them from the top of the stairs, and quite a few had been reprimanded for leaving the lights on. He didn't go up there at all, he confided. Even though they replaced the ballasts in the hallway, the lights still flickered and buzzed. He's afraid that he'll get caught up there when the lights go off, and something will get him too. I hope the manager seals that room up someday. I hope they tear that stairwell down and just fill in the space with something else. Given what they made me sign when I left, though, I don't think they will. I think they know what's up those stairs, and I think they consider an employee going missing now and then a perfect price to pay for the wrath they would face if they left it unfed. As someone who was almost its dinner, I can't say I don't feel a little bit of sympathy for them. The thought of that thing finding me on a dark night would be enough to make me do almost anything to avoid it. I've worked as an ER tech for a long time, going on about 12 years now. People often ask me why I don't just go back to school or become a nurse or a phlebotomist or something. If I like the environment so much, why not advance? Well, A, that's a big commitment of time and money that I'm not really willing to put forth the effort for. And B, I actually kind of like what I do. It's just the right amount of responsibility, and you don't feel like just another cog in the wheel either. I know enough about medicine, and I've picked up enough information on my job to help people, to tell doctors and nurses what I know concisely, and generally feel like I'm a key player in the ER team. Also, probably a smaller C, the ER is where I get my best stories from. The ER is such a chaotic nexus within the hospital, and you never honestly know what's going to wander through the doors. It could be a 5-car pileup. Could be a couple of horny teens that got their braces stuck together. You just never know. I've talked to Wall Street big shots, prostitutes, doctors who are too ashamed to go to their own hospital ERs for treatment, and even a few inmates from the state prison, though the guards don't really like you lingering. My job is usually to take vitals, get samples, and ask questions, and I'm pretty good at it. So when the orders came to bring a woman down to X-ray, I hopped to it. The couple was young, probably in their late 20s. The woman looked worse for wear, but not too bad off. She had some cuts on her face, some more cuts and bruises on her hands, and she kept grabbing her stomach and wincing. I told the husband, the rings were a dead giveaway, that we were going to make a quick trip to radiology, and I made small talk with the wife on the way there. I asked what had brought her here today, and she told me meekly that it was stomach pains. When I asked if she'd eaten anything that didn't agree with her, she said about the last thing I would have expected to hear. About a pound of garbage, I guess. I looked dumbfounded as we wheeled her in, and Claire and Robert helped her get on the table. She moved like someone in immense pain, and as I followed the techs out of the room, Randall asked if she really had a belly full of garbage. I told him I had no clue, and that I guess that's what they were hoping to find out with this x-ray. He turned the machine on, and Claire went back in to reset the slides a few times as they took their pictures. As the images came on screen, Randall raised an eyebrow. Well, she'll have a bowel obstruction, that's for sure. But if she ate all that trash, I'm pretty sure that a lot of it wasn't meant to be digested. I blinked, astonished. She did indeed have a belly full of garbage, right down to half a black garbage bag. Her stomach was oddly distended, and she looked as though if she'd eaten any more garbage, she would have been in danger of rupturing. Randall said he would pass the x-ray along to Dr. Yolander, but it was likely that she'd be heading into surgery. As I took her back to her room, I couldn't help myself from asking how she had come to eat all that garbage. I don't remember, she said, and I believed her. I just woke up in the garbage dump. I took her back to her room and tried to go about my day, but the woman and her husband were never far from my mind. I just couldn't understand how someone could eat all that garbage and not realize it. As my day proceeded, I kept thinking about her and her garbage belly. As my shift came to an end, I saw that the pair was still in the ER. I clocked out and went to see if I could get some answers if they were willing to talk to me. I knocked on the door and they invited me in as I made my request. Sorry to trouble you, and not to pry, ma'am, but I've been wondering about your condition all day long, and it's really been giving me fits. If you don't mind, can I ask how it happened? As it turned out, they were both willing to talk, so I sat down and heard the whole story. I'd been having stomach cramps for a few days now. I hadn't been sleeping very well either, and my dreams had been kind of hectic. For the past week, every dream found me in a castle where people I didn't know would call me to a big banquet. I would eat and eat and eat and wake up with my mouth tasting terrible and my stomach rolling and heavy. I also began to suspect that I was going somewhere, sleepwalking in the middle of the night. On more than one occasion, my sheets were dirty, and I had found footprints leading from the unlocked front door to the bedroom 3 or 4 times. My, movements were becoming alarming as well. They were larger than usual, and they hurt when they came out. This was confusing since my appetite was at an all-time low. I barely ate anything, constantly feeling bloated and full, and after 9 days of this, I was ready to go to the hospital myself. That was before my husband woke up to find I was gone. She looked over at her husband, and he seemed hesitant at first to continue. Look, it wasn't that I suspected her of anything, okay? We've been married about 3 years, and I could tell that something was different. She wasn't eating, She was sleeping fitfully, and I thought maybe something was going on. It just so happened that she had kicked me that night, waking me up, you see, and I was still getting back to sleep when she suddenly got out of bed and went towards the kitchen. I expected that she wanted a drink, but when I heard the door open, I got up to see where she was going. Imagine my surprise when I find the back door open and my wife missing. I walked the neighborhood looking for her, wondering why she had disappeared in the middle of the night, before I finally came back home, hoping she would come back. Had she left on her own, or had someone called her? Was she sleepwalking? I was worried, but I guess that my sleepiness got the best of me after a while. When I woke up suddenly on the couch, I found her snug in bed and thought maybe I'd been dreaming. When I saw the muddy trail going from the kitchen to the bedroom, though, I knew it had been no dream. She put a hand over his, and he clutched it worriedly. The two looked at each other for a minute, and suddenly I felt like I was intruding on this moment. These two were worried. Their marriage was relatively new, and it was clear that the husband also felt a little guilty about where his mind might have went when she was gone. Maybe he had suspected her of infidelity, and perhaps she had suspected his suspicion as well. Meanwhile, I was suffering the next day from some intense stomach pain. I hadn't eaten much the day before, nothing more than broth, so the idea that I was having stomach cramps from a cup of soup was pretty perplexing. I called out that day, telling my husband that I wasn't feeling well, and just laid in bed. I was racked with stomach cramps, and I slept really fitfully for most of the day. I think he sensed how sick I was, and when he got home, he tried to ply me with tea and soup that I just couldn't keep down. I felt like I wanted to vomit, but all my body could do was dry heave. It felt like something was stopping it from coming up, and I really wished I could just flush myself out and get rid of this pain. The husband picked back up then, running a tongue over his dry lips before he started. I was glad when she fell asleep that night, but I was still on high alert to see if she would leave. I lay in bed trying to get still, but not get too sleepy. I just kept watching her, waiting to see what she would do, and then when midnight rolled around, she did indeed slide from the bed and head for the kitchen. I let her get a little head start, coming out of bed as she got to the kitchen, and when I heard the back door open, I was off and running. She squeezed his hand then and looked back at me. That night, the dream was the most vivid yet. I had gone to the table, hearing the voices calling for me, but the table was bare. The plates were empty, and I was just so hungry that I scattered them off the table in a rage. I was starving, and these voices had called me in here for nothing. When I was done, I heard them calling me again. I remembered that maybe they had called me deeper into the place before, but I couldn't remember it clearly. I just went. I just ran, and the castle seemed to fly by around me. She had thrown garbage all over the place, scattered some papers off the counter, and I just kind of looked around at the carnage for a minute. Had the trash can maybe been turned over yesterday too? I didn't have more than a few seconds to take it all in, because the back door was open, and I could see one slipper-clad foot disappearing around the side of the house. Now, I ran track in high school, and I've tried to keep it up so that, I don't get what my friends call married weight. When I tell you that it was all I could do to keep up with her, I'm not joking. She was damn near running on 4 legs, eating up the ground as she made her way to the last place I would have ever imagined, the city dump. I can't explain it, she cut in. In my dream, the voices were calling me. The smells were wafting around my nose in an intoxicating cloud. I was so hungry that I couldn't stop myself. I was sprinting, running flat out. Something was egging me on as I tried to get to the food as quickly as I could. Suddenly, I was in a banquet hall, a table full of food piled high with the most delicious things. Joints of meat, bowls of stew, fresh salad with nuts and dressing, puddings and cakes, and everything I love to eat. I was drooling. I could almost feel it running down my face, and I ran towards those tables like someone possessed. I stopped for a few seconds when I saw what she was doing. It was the last place I would have ever expected. What the hell could she possibly want here? That's probably why she had such an opportunity to do what she did. I felt like I knew what was coming next, but I asked him to continue anyway. This had become a train wreck, a disaster, but my lizard brain needed to watch until the last car came to a stop. Because that's what you do, isn't it? We watch the accident until it finally stops, till it's too late for us to stop it, and then we pick up the pieces. She went to the nearest trash pile and she just started eating. As I ate in my dream, I could feel all those wonderful foods filling my mouth with their tastes. I devoured them. I was ravenous for more, and I just kept eating. I could feel people behind me in the dream, applauding me and cheering for me as they called for me to fill my belly. But one of them was different. My hair prickled as one of them called my name, trying to make me stop, and their applause changed to jeers as the one shade approached me. Their stories became a little jumbled as they kept cutting over each other, but I tried to listen as best I could. I called her name. I couldn't think of anything else to do, but she just kept devouring that slop. She would tear some of the bags open. Some of them she would just rip open with her teeth, and she was chewing up anything that went into her mouth. Rotten food, paper, glass, anything that went down, and she was eating like it was the last meal of her life. I ran towards her, shouting her name and calling for her to stop, but when I tried to put a hand on her, she turned and snarled at me, surprising me and making me step away. Whatever it was, it had touched me, and everything inside me roared to the surface to stop it. I was eating, I was filling my belly, and this creature was jealous of my good fortune. I turned and screeched at it, and for a moment it moved away. Then it grabbed me and pulled me away from the banquet, and I struggled and screamed, striking out with my arms and legs as I tried to fight it off. I was put off for a second, but then I grabbed her and tried to pull her away. She was going to hurt herself. I could already see cuts on her face and hands, and I didn't want her to puncture her esophagus or her stomach or something. I drug her away from the garbage pile, and that's when I saw the others. He spoke like someone who's realized that they're surrounded by a pack of wolves, and I just couldn't help myself. Others? It appeared it wasn't just my wife who'd come out to feed. There were dozens of them, these haggard shadows that lumbered amidst the trash. They hissed at me. They screamed at me like angry cats. And at that moment, I did something I had never done before. I looked at my wife, her eyes glazed over and her body fighting me with every fiber of her being, and I slapped her. I'm ashamed to say it, but I slapped her. She came awake shakily, disoriented, unsure where she was, and I just picked her up and booked it. The hissing people, those garbage people, they followed after us, but I didn't look back. I didn't even stop running until we were already inside the house with the door locked. I shook my head a little as he finished, but it was almost 9 when you were finally admitted. Why did it take you so long to get here? I didn't mean to sound judgy, but I guess I must have, because the husband bristled a little. Well, we had to wait for the goddamn garbage people to leave for one. She had covered his hand again, trying to get him to calm down a little before she continued. I don't remember anything before we got home. I came fully awake on the couch, my husband peeking through the windows as my stomach heaved and my body ached. I coughed up a piece of glass then, a long red shard that felt like it had cut my throat on the way out. And as I turned, I started crying. I asked him what was happening, and he started telling me about how he'd followed me to the dump. He told me about the garbage people, probably the ones who'd been calling me this whole time, and I just sat on the couch and tried to process it all. I felt like I wanted to throw up again, but I couldn't bring anything up. I was scared and hurting, and I just wanted it all to end. I don't know why they wanted my wife so badly, but about 6 of them haunted our yard for the next couple hours. They skulked, making it impossible to get a good look at them. They looked ragged. Their hair was shaggy and their clothes were mostly cast-offs. If I'd seen them on the street, I'd have thought they were homeless.
They never approached the house, but they did hide in the bushes, under our cars, and anywhere else they could lurk without being seen. I explained what I had seen to my wife, all the while trying to keep an eye on these people. When the sun started coming up, they finally fled, and after I was sure they were gone, I loaded her in the car and brought her here. The receptionist just wrote down stomach aches when I told her what we were going through, so it took several hours of waiting in the lobby before they could admit us. Even then, I don't think they considered us a priority until after that x-ray. I knew he was right, but before I could say so, the door was pushed open and 3 orderlies came in with a stretcher. They loaded her frantically, saying they needed to get an ultrasound immediately. Something had come up on the blood work, and they needed to make sure that everything was okay after that hastily given x-ray. When I asked the nurse in the hall what was going on, she said they had ordered the x-ray before discovering that the woman was pregnant. That's what's been bugging me since I left the hospital. The husband had seemed shocked by her pregnancy when they told him. She'd had ovarian cysts when she was younger. The doctor claimed that she'd never be able to become pregnant. I don't understand this, he said. He looked shell-shocked. Personally, I'm left with another concern. What sort of baby gives his mother a craving for garbage? Like I said, you just never know what you're gonna see come in the ER when you clock in.
When David came stumbling towards the desk at about 5:30 one morning, he looked like a man who'd just come back from war. I picked up the phone and called Carl immediately, telling him to get here on the run. I wouldn't usually call security for someone I knew just wandering up. Still, despite David looking like he'd seen a ghost, there was another very crucial reason I notified Carl of the terrified-looking maintenance man who had just staggered up and leaned against my desk. Carl would want to know, especially after what had been going on for the last 3 days. David had been missing after failing to clock out one morning. When Carl had come in the next night and told me that David was missing, I immediately felt bad about how I'd treated him the last time we'd spoken. David had been losing things lately. Last week alone, he'd lost 2 wrenches, a drywall saw, a tool bag, and an 8-foot ladder. The ladder seemed to almost offend him, and he complained bitterly about it for several days. He had also started talking about that damn stairwell again, the one he claimed made things disappear sometimes. They always appeared on the roof again, or so he said, and he went on and on about it until I just couldn't take it anymore. One early morning, after a night of checking in complainers and listening to whiners, I finally told him that it was probably under the stairs somewhere and he should probably go look for it instead of bothering me. He walked off in a huff, and I didn't see him again until he staggered up to my desk just before quitting time. As Carl ran up, puffing like a bellows, I heard David whisper, "It was the stairs. I climbed and climbed, but they just never ended." I waited with him until the stretcher rolled away, and he groaned as they trundled him past the stairwell and into the ER. I learned through the grapevine that he had been suffering from dehydration and exhaustion. They said it looked like he'd been walking for days, and his feet were covered in blisters. Management kept him isolated for the first 5 days, and I tried to visit him every day. On the 6th day, they finally let me in, and I heard how he had spent the last 3 days on the stairs. He was watching TV when I arrived, and my first act was to apologize for being so short with him. "It's nothing," David assured me. "I let all the loss go to my mouth. Turns out, I should have just let it go," David said, getting a faraway look about him. Even after 5 days of rest, David still looked haggard. "It would have saved me being stuck on that damn stairwell for 3 days. I didn't ask for an explanation. The man had been through enough. It was true that I wanted to hear the story of his disappearance, but after that look, I couldn't bring myself to pry. That look was the same I'd seen on men that had been through natural disasters. Turned out, I didn't have to ask, though. David wanted to talk about it. "I had gone to check the stairwell, see if maybe I'd left it on the upper landing," he said, stuttering as he recalled the events. When the door slammed shut behind me, I knew something didn't sound right." He was trying to keep a smile on his face, but it looked ghastly for the effort. "But I went up the stairs anyway, never knowing what I was getting into." The door had slammed with a note of finality, and David had felt himself shudder as it rang out behind him. David hadn't been that scared in a long time, but he'd be damned if he could say why. He'd felt, for a moment, like a goose had walked over his grave, and he wanted nothing so much as to run back to the door and push it open again. Instead, he mounted the stairs and climbed the 30 steps to the first landing. David had made this trip 1,000 times, and it seemed comfortable to hear his boots clump, clump, clump up the polished concrete steps. He knew all of them, all 150 stairs over the 5 floors of the hospital, and he would have said that there was nothing new or strange about them. He made it to the second landing and looked around as though he expected the missing items to have materialized from nothing. He still saw no ladder or any of his tools and was about to climb to the next floor when he noticed that the number card was missing from the second floor landing. He made a mental note to get a new one from the workshop and headed up to the 3rd floor. People stole them from time to time, mostly kids, and David was pretty used to replacing them. However, David felt his anger bubbling up when he got to the 3rd floor landing and noticed that the number was gone there too. David ground his teeth together, finding nothing but more work. Some group of bored kids had come by and stolen his signs, and now he had to get them replaced before management noticed. It would be hard to hang it without a ladder, but he would manage somehow. Thankfully, they hadn't stolen his power drill, so he wouldn't have to work too hard to get them hung again. He climbed to the next floor, and his blistering curses echoed down the stairs behind him. They had stolen this one too. What the hell was going on? When he found the same missing sign on the 5th floor, David decided to give up on this little errand. To hell with his ladder. He apparently had work to do. David had descended back down to what he thought was the 1st floor when he noticed that the door was locked. The stairwell door was never supposed to be locked. It was the building's escape route in case of a fire. As David tried to open the door, he shouted and slammed his shoulder against it. He peeked through the little window set into the door, but the image on the other side just didn't look right. The world beyond was nothing like what he'd expected. It looked like the hospital he'd known, but it was covered in a swirl of smog or smoke or something, and David had feared that there might actually be a fire in progress. He'd picked up his radio and tried to call for help, but the squall from the other side made him pull away quickly. David began to wonder what sort of things were going on, and whether he might be in over his head. He decided to climb to the 2nd floor and try the door, but the 2nd floor was much the same. David was terrified by this point. He didn't understand. If it was a fire, people should be on the stairs, fleeing the building. There should be no reason for the doors not to open. They had no locks to speak of in the first place. There was a key lock that could be engaged if you were painting or there was an emergency on the stairs, but only David and Hector, the day shift supervisor, had keys to that lock. David began to run up the stairs, 2 at a time, trying every door he came to and finding them all locked and inaccessible. At the 5th floor, David comforted himself with the idea that he could just go up to the roof and try to get someone's attention, maybe even climb down the side of the building. When the stairwell led to another floor with another identical door and another set of steps ascending upward, David really began to panic. He rushed up the stairs, his mind trying to make sense of what he was seeing. He climbed and climbed, sure that any minute he would see the access door to the roof, sure that he would realize that this had all been some sort of fever dream. But no matter how high he climbed or how fast he ran, he never reached the top of the stairs. David was nearly hyperventilating when he finally sat down and put his back against the wall. It didn't make any sense. The stairs were only 5 stories tall. David walked every step at least 5 times a day. The roof was where he went to smoke, since the admins wouldn't let him do it out in front of the hospital anymore. How many times a day did he go up to the roof to have a cigarette? 5? 10? When the ladder and tools had gone missing, he could have overlooked that as some kind of mistake. This, however, was an affront to his very senses. As David leaned against the wall, the unopened door sitting across from him with its hazy window, he was in for another shock. He was digging in his fanny pack, something he kept snacks in just in case he had a low blood sugar spell. As he peeled the wrapper off the granola bar, he became aware of a prickling on his skin. He could see a strange shadow from the corner of his eye, and looked over to the small window that showed him the strange hospital floor beyond the barrier. At first, he thought maybe the lights had gone out over there, but the more his eyes searched, the more he realized that something was blocking out the light that came woozily through the rectangle. Its skin was mottled purple. Its eyes were large and round, filled with little floating spots of blood. Its teeth were fixed in a monstrous, predatory grin. Those spotty eyes were fixed on David, and its regard was something that made his skin crawl. For just a moment, David thought it was screaming at him.
When he lunged off the wall and began to run up the stairs, he realized he was the one who was screaming. David couldn't have said how many stairs he ran up, couldn't begin to say how long his panic had caused him to run in a terrified flight, but he was soon pelting upwards at a breakneck speed. When he finally collapsed, the concrete scraping his cheek as he fell, his lungs burned and pumped with the effort to keep up with his galloping heart. He might have been laying there for minutes, days, even just seconds, but when he felt the weight of those terrible eyes looking at him again, David turned his head and saw that a new creature was staring through the little window. It looked like a bat that had fallen into a pincushion, and its skin rippled with sharp spines, even as its two intelligent eyes stared at him through the glass. He wanted to scream, he wanted to run, but his legs would not support him. He lay there transfixed by the sight of this terrible creature as it stared at him. What were its intentions? Could, and the thought scared him more than the sight of the creature, this thing get through the door? It seemed content to stare at him like a visitor in a zoo, but what if its curiosity, or even its hunger, got the better of it? David had thought that his energy was spent. When the overhead light went out, though, leaving him in total darkness save for the thin sliver that came through the rectangular window, he found that his terror and adrenaline gave him a little bit more. He screamed again, the scream tearing out of him like a wound, and he ran towards the light he saw on the landing above him. He kept climbing, seeing the lights disappear below him, and as the darkness chased him up the stairs, David felt he was on the verge of madness. He had to stay in the light. Something told him that it would be very bad if he didn't, and he believed it. When he fell, his foot fumbling on the edge of the step, he screamed as he tumbled back into the blackness. The concrete stairs scraped him up, cutting his skin and rubbing him raw. He fell into the darkness, rolling backwards as momentum took him down onto the landing with the door that would not open. The light spilled across him, making him look like an actor at the end of a play. The light was bright but murky, and it became murkier still as the creatures gathered around the window to look at him. David's head hurt. He had clearly hit it on the way down. As he lay there in that deepening darkness, he almost wished that they would come in and get him. His body was a mass of pain, and his sanity felt like a ball of yarn after a kitten's been at it. As he lay there and contemplated his death, David felt himself slipping off into unconsciousness. He didn't know if he'd ever wake up again, and at that moment, he didn't really care. The next thing I knew, I was coming to on the first floor landing and everything was back to normal, David said. I listened to David's story, my breath catching several times, unsure of what to make of it. In the 3 days he had been missing, 100 people had been up and down those stairs. None of them had reported seeing David. None of them had reported being trapped in the stairwell, and the thought that people had climbed the stairs where David had ran in a blind panic was somehow even more terrifying. Someone on day shift maintenance found his missing ladder and tools in the basement the day before David was to be released. The tools were neatly placed under the ladder, which was folded up and leaned against the boiler. Management assumed that David had misplaced it, but David swore that he hadn't been in the basement for months. Not since I had to check the hot water heater after the pilot light went out, he said, his voice unsure. No one could explain where David had been or what had happened to him, but they all agreed that David would likely be fired if it ever happened again. David doesn't go into the stairwell anymore, not unless he has someone with him. Carl goes with him sometimes if he has to use the stairs, and I've come with him a few times if I was on break or something. Otherwise, David takes the elevator. He's lost his liking for those 150 stairs now, and I can't say as I blame him. It did stop him from smoking, so I guess there was that. The elevator would only go up to the 5th floor, and since no one he knew smoked, David gave up the habit. I guess his smoking was a small price to pay for never having to experience that again. There are places in this old hospital that seem to border on places better left alone. These places seem to hunger for us, to draw us to them, and those who enter are rarely the same again.